Here's chapter 11, and it's the beginning of a small section on the physics of matter, material, and we're going to start out talking about the atomic nature of matter. We're actually going to challenge maybe some of what you have already learned about the atomic nature of material, in that the models that you've been exposed to are pretty simple, and we will look at some more complicated models. So we will look at the hypothesis, the atomic hypothesis. We will look at characteristics of atoms. We will look at the imagery available to us and the models of atomic structure that we have. If you're not already familiar with Richard Feynman, who was a hugely influential physicist, both in physics and more so in the teaching of physics, you certainly need to when you have a chance, learn more about Feynman. A very interesting and entertaining guy. Like the other parts of science that we have looked at, there's a historical basis, and people in different times and cultures have looked at the ideas of matter. And the old Aristotelian was back to the elements of earth, air, fire, and water, which is really some beautiful stuff if you read it. The idea of atoms could be found by Greeks a little bit earlier. Probably our most quote-unquote scientific is John Dalton in the 1800s. As a review, when we talk about atoms, think about if you had a piece of foil and we cut it in half. And then we cut it in half again. And then we took a piece and cut it in half, and cut it in half, and cut it in half. Aluminum foil happens to be pure aluminum. And if we continue to cut it in half until the point that it could not be halved again, then we would have reached an atom. We don't have the physical means to do that, but conceptually, when you want to isolate an atom, you would cut something in half again and again and again and again. John Dalton was among the group of scientists who were more familiar with quote-unquote modern chemistry, and were able to propose this idea that one could reach a point in a material where there was a place that you could go no smaller and still keep the characteristics of that material. Another major step toward the modern idea of atomic structure came from, oddly enough, a botanist, Robert Brown, who observed and discussed what we now call Brownian motion. You have a separate video on that, and make sure that you have a good understanding of what Brownian motion looks like. A good analogy to that is we can't see atoms, but we can see the effect of them with Brownian motion. You know, the same way that we cannot see the wind. We know the wind is there because we see the effect of it with tree branches or leaves blowing. There's also another excellent video talking about the role of Einstein, and and arguing that his earlier paper before the E=mc² thing is probably as influential as his better known work. So Einstein was pivotal in our current model thinking of atomic structure. Here's an image to help you remember Brownian motion, that we see things move, and it's a result of them being struck by moving air molecules, which we cannot see. And of course, air molecules are made up of sometimes atoms, or air is made up sometimes of atoms and sometimes of molecules. You are used to seeing, and it's not a bad model, you are used to seeing kind of the solar system looking image of an atom. We're going to challenge that and consider the atom a little bit differently. But go ahead and think about your solar system model of an atom. I've given you a different picture here. The thing to remember about an atom is that they are motion, they are energy. They're very tiny. They are well smaller than anything that we can see in image. And the other thing about atoms is that they, under normal circumstances, do not change. They can form molecules, they can form isotopes that we'll talk about later, but generally an atom by itself takes a pretty extraordinary event to change. So the atoms that are in your environment today are the ones that have been in certainly since the beginning of the Earth. And the atoms that are in you are the atoms that have been in other people and other things. Kind of creepy when you think about it. Which one of these statements is incorrect? Are atoms, is it the question about the size relative to visible light? Is it that they are not solid? Is it that they are moving? Is it that we create them? Which is incorrect. Now, the part that is incorrect is that we create them. We create cells, we create a whole lot of other things, but the building block of them is atoms, which have been here for virtually forever. Now, here's a big misconception that you've got. We are accustomed to seeing some really, really crazy close-up pictures. Generally, what you are looking at is something like a cell. You're looking at something that is many, many, many orders of magnitude larger than an atom. We don't really see atoms, we see reflections of them. And some of the earliest work was with some electron microscopes. Even the microscopes are not atomic. They are using electrons and then seeing what the electrons bounce off of. So our classical model with a nucleus surrounded by electrons is a little bit, is not supported by the images that we get. Here's a better image, and this is the end of a platinum needle in a electron microscope of some sort. This is attributed to a field ion microscope. And what you're seeing, each bright light there, each bright spot, is in fact a platinum atom at the end of this needle. So we don't see them, we see the evidence of them, we see the reflections of them. Again, you've probably been familiar with this, and you're used to seeing the model that looks like a solar system. In an atom, you've got the nucleus, and then if you get into more detail, it would be nucleons and quarks. That's a little bit more detail than we'll go into this class, but there is good literature out there, particularly the thing about quarks is very fun to read. You have a very good video that is talking about the empty volume of an atom, and be sure to look at that and try to wrap your head around that. Again, just like our image of the solar system, or our drawings of the solar system are so badly out of scale that show the empty volume between planets and the sun. Likewise with the models that we see of an atom. What's really happening is very, very different than the little picture that we're used to seeing. Here's an idea of the sort of picture that you see, which is showing kind of an egg yolky center with the core of the atom. The atom would have, or the nucleus of an atom, this picture calls it a core, with protons and neutrons, and then being orbited by electrons. The electrons are much, much further away from the core than this image shows. And the electrons are more of a cloud or an energy field rather than little bits roaming around. But again, you've got a good video to look at for that. And just remember that the things that we draw and discuss are highly simplified models of what the reality is, or the reality that we understand it to be at this point.